In this talk, we're going to learn about the development of non-vascular plants. By the end of this talk, students should be able to describe the general characteristics and be able to name different types of non-vascular plants. Students should also be able to explain sexual reproduction in non-vascular plants and be able to describe the life cycle of a representative non-vascular plant.
When we try to classify plants, we can classify them in many ways, but the one that we're going to focus on is on the basis of different structures that they have. Non-vascular plants are one group in which they don't have different tissues that are involved in the transport of water and nutrients. Vascular plants are the ones that evolved later, and they are the ones that have conducting channels like xylem, and they have tissues like phloem that allow the transport of substances. In these set of slides, we will be focusing on the non-vascular plants. And the non-vascular plants include mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. Now, non-vascular plants are abundantly found in moist places. They don't have water-conducting tracheids, and tracheids are basically cells that help conduct water in plants. So in the absence of these tracheids, they are unable to have structures that can very efficiently conduct water, and hence they are found in very moist places. Now, non-vascular plants possess anchoring systems that are called as rhizoids, and these rhizoids' major role is to anchor the plant in a place. However, they can absorb water also. Here is a picture where we can see these root-like structure called rhizoids, but please remember these aren't actually roots. So they do have their special name, which is rhizoids, and rhizoids are abundantly found in non-vascular plants. Now, when we look at non-vascular plants, there are three main examples that come up, which are the liverworts, the mosses, and the hornworts. Collectively, they're also called as bryophytes. Now, plants are known to undergo asexual reproduction, but in the case of non-vascular plants and even vascular plants, sexual reproduction can also occur. We're going to now look at liverworts, and these are plants that have a flat structure and grow close to the ground, as you can see in the pictures. Liverworts have single-celled rhizoids that help in anchoring and absorbing water. Their main function is anchoring, but they can absorb water also. And in the picture to the right, we can see these hair-like rhizoids. In the case of liverworts and in all non-vascular plants, the gametophyte, which is the haploid stage of the plant, is the dominant part of the plant life cycle. The gametophyte cells do have chloroplasts, and hence they can perform photosynthesis. The diploid part of the plant's life cycle, which is the sporophyte, is not photosynthetic and normally depends on the gametophyte for nutrients. Mosses are non-vascular plants that differ from liverworts in the way their leaf-like structures are arranged. So mosses show these small leaf-like structures, as you can see in the figure in the blue box, that are arranged spirally, or alternately they can be arranged around a stem-like axis. And these structures do have stomata. So in the case of mosses, stomata have evolved, however they would normally not present in liverworts. When we look at the liverworts and look at the arrangement of their leaves, we can definitely see that there is a difference in the way the leaves are arranged when it comes to liverworts and when we compare them to mosses. These are leaf-like structures, they're not true leaves, and hence we tend to call them as leaf-like structures. In the case of mosses, the gametophyte is once again the dominant part of the plant's life cycle and more long-lived. Additionally, it can perform photosynthesis because they do have chloroplasts. Now, the sporophyte, on the other hand, is not photosynthetic, and if you look at the picture to the right, all those brown structures that are horizontal with these little bulbs on the top, those are basically the sporophyte in the case of mosses, and since they don't have chloroplasts, then they're not photosynthetic. However, they do get nourishment from the gametophyte. Hornworts are the earliest land plants, And so in the case of mosses and liverworts, they have to be close to a water body. But in the case of hornworts, they're more terrestrial in nature compared to the liverworts and the mosses. Similar to the mosses and the liverworts, the gametophyte is the dominant part of the plant's life cycle. And unlike what we saw in the case of mosses, the hornwort sporophytes are photosynthetic in nature. Stomata are also present in hornworts. Now when we look at the picture, all those vertical grass-like shoots that you are seeing are actually the sporophytes, and the green portions that are attached to the ground, that is the gametophyte of the hornwort. Let us now look at the reproduction in non-vascular plants. Now all plants can undergo asexual as well as sexual reproduction. However, we're going to focus only on sexual reproduction. In the case of non-vascular plants, the gametophyte is the dominant stage in the life cycle. The gametophyte, just to remind you, is haploid, and that is the structure of the plant that's going to make the gametes. The gametophyte produces gametangia, and gametangia are organs that are going to form the gametes. So when we look at the gametangium that makes male gametes, it is called as the antheridia, and the male gametes that are formed are called as sperm. Archegonia are the reproductive structures or organs that make the female gametes in the case of non-vascular plants. And the female gamete is called as an egg. Antheridia and archegonia can be made on the same gametophyte, and in that case we say that that gametophyte is bisexual. Or they can be made in different gametophytes. So some non-vascular plants will have a separate male gametophyte and a female gametophyte, whereas other types of non-vascular plants can have one gametophyte in which both we have the antheridia as well as the archegonia. Let us first focus on the antheridia. The antheridia is the gametangium that makes the male gametes, and a gametophyte can have multiple antheridia. Now, when we look at the figure, here we can see those oval dark blue or purplish structure, which are the antheridia. So as we can see in this specific picture, there are many antheridia that are present. Each antheridium produces many sperm that are encased in a jacket that is made of cells. So when we look at the picture to the right, here we can see the antheridia, and there are at least two complete antheridia that we can observe. And within the antheridia, we have the spermatids, which are going to form the sperms. And then they are surrounded by a covering of cells called as a jacket. And they're sterile because they basically can't play a role in reproduction. The antheridia are normally attached to the gametophyte through a basal stalk. And that is the one that's we can see in the figure is towards the right end of the figure. Now the sperm and the antheridia are the male gametes, and they are flagellated, and so hence they can swim. And so when we look at this picture here, we can see some of the sperm, and they normally are diflagellated, which means they have two flagella. However, they need water to reach the female gamete, and so they need to be near water. Now, many times antheridia are located in a cup-like structure, which is what we can see in the figure below. And this cup-like structure collects rainwater, and hence it's called as a splash cup. So as rain falls or raindrops fall on the plant, they can get collected in this splash cup. And we can see in this picture to the right a much more better shape of that cup with all the antheridia in there. In this way, when rainwater falls into that, the antheridia can then open up and release the sperm into that water, and then the sperm can swim. Let us now look at the part of the gametophyte that makes the gametangium for the female gametes. And this gametangium is called as the archegonia. Now, similar to antheridia, a gametophyte can have multiple archegonia. So when we look at this figure, we're able to see one archegonium that's present in the box, and right next to it is the second archegonium. And that way, there are at least two archegonium that we can see in this figure clearly. Now, even though a gametophyte can have multiple archegonia, Each archegonium produces only one egg cell at its base, and that's what you can see in the figure in the box, where in one of these circular regions, that's where the egg usually is. You do see a bunch of cells above it, which form what's called as the neck, and we will see the importance of this later. Now, the archegonia are able to secrete chemicals that allow sperm to swim towards them so that the sperm, through their flagella, are able to move towards the archegonia, and that way they're able to enter the archegonia and fertilize the egg. Now, during the process of fertilization, the sperm formed in the antheridia, so if we look at the picture, here we see the antheridia. And in the antheridia, the sperm are made. And when there is moisture, like when it rains or there is some water that has been formed, for example, due to condensation or so at nighttime, then that time the antheridia will go ahead and release the sperm. And these mature sperm are going to then swim towards the archegonia because the archegonia secretes a chemical that functions as an attractant. And this way the sperm know where to go to find the archegonia. Now, once the sperm reach the archegonia, they enter the archegonium through the neck cells, which are present at the top. And as they enter through, they ultimately will come to the base where you can find the egg. And one sperm will fuse with the egg cells to form a zygote. Now, the zygote that is made is due to the fusion of two haploid cells, and hence it is a diploid cell. Now, once this diploid zygote is formed, it remains in the tissue of the female gametophyte. And this is what is shown in the figure, where we can see that the diploid zygote has undergone multiple cell divisions to form an embryo, but it is surrounded by the tissues of the female gametophyte, which are the maternal tissues. So nutrients are transferred from that parent female gametophyte to the embryo through these cells called as placental transfer cells that you can see on the right side of the figure. Now, the zygote ultimately develops into an embryo within the parent, which is something that we see even in the case of mammals, where the zygote develops into an embryo within the mother's womb. So that's why sometimes plants are also called as embryophytes, because the zygote develops into an embryo within the parent. Once the embryo is formed, the process of forming the sporophyte begins, and this occurs while it is within the parental gametophyte. So here we can see in the picture, right, that has the box, within the box the embryo has formed into a young sporophyte, and this sporophyte is diploid because it arose from a diploid zygote. Now, as this young sporophyte grows, it undergoes maturation, and it's able to form these different structures that we can see, which are the foot, the seta, and the capsule. So the sporophyte forms a capsule that's also called as a sporangium. And in the sporangium, you have diploid sporocytes that undergo meiosis to form haploid spores. And so thus now we've ended up with once again a haploid cell, which is within this sporangium. These spores, which are haploid, they have spore walls called as sporopollenin, which makes them resistant to harsh environments. And once this development is complete, then at some point these spores can be liberated. Now, just to remind you, the different parts of a sporophyte include the foot, the seta, and the capsule. The foot is the part that actually makes contact with the female gametophyte. The seta is like a stalk, and the capsule is where the spores are. The sporophyte is highly dependent on the gametophyte, which is the parental gametophyte, for nutrition. And in the case of liverworts and mosses, they can't undergo photosynthesis. So in the pictures below, you're able to see the different sporophytes that can be seen in liverworts as well as in mosses. Now, once the sporophyte development is complete and the spores have matured, the spores are dispersed from a structure called as the peristome that is present in the sporangia. And this aids in the dispersal of the spores. Now, once the spores have dispersed, then they can germinate elsewhere, and when that happens, they basically form another gametophyte. Now, to look at the different steps involved in the formation of the gametophyte, we can see that the spore germinates, and when it germinates, it forms a structure called as a protonema, which is quite similar in appearance to algae. The protonema then forms these bud-like structures, and these bud-like structures ultimately grow to form what's called as a gametophore. In the gametophore, you actually are going to have the gametangia, which are these organs that are going to make the male and female gametes. So all of this together, all the different gametophores together form the gametophyte. Now this gametophyte needs to be anchored, and hence rhizoids are there that allow the gametophyte to anchor to the ground.
Thus, in the case of non-vascular plants, we can see the alternation of generations where there is a dominant gametophyte, but we also have a sporophyte that is diploid. In the next slide, we're going to view an animation that describes the life cycle of the moss.
Haploid gametophytes are the most conspicuous stage in the moss life cycle. The spongy green plants we see covering moist ground or fallen logs. Vase-shaped archegonia, the structures that produce eggs, develop at the tips of female gametophytes. Antheridia, which produce sperm, develop on the tops of male gametophytes. Because the gametophyte stage is haploid, eggs and sperm are produced by mitosis in the archegonia and antheridia. Sperms swim through moisture from antheridia and fertilize eggs in the archegonia. A diploid fertilized egg, called a zygote, develops into an embryo, which grows into a sporophyte, a tall filament with a sporangium at its tip. The sporophyte obtains its nutrients from the female gametophyte. In the sporangium, diploid cells undergo meiosis to produce haploid spores. As the sporangium matures and dries out, its lid pops open. Spores spill out and are carried away by the wind. A spore settles on moist ground, germinates, and develops via mitosis into a thread-like haploid protonema, which resembles a green alga. The protonema eventually develops into a male or female gametophyte, completing the moss life cycle.
Thus, to summarize, we learned about non-vascular plants and different steps involved in their sexual reproduction. We were also able to learn the life cycle of a representative non-vascular plant.